Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Human SOS Show, episode 101. So we're working on our third hundred set of episodes. So welcome. Just remind everyone to let us know where you're joining from, and we also want to hear your questions and comments as we go along as well. So Anton, let us know what's going on.
Good morning, folks. Thanks so much for joining. Always a pleasure to see where you're joining from and see our regulars in here. But today we're going to talk about getting unstuck and really diving into how stress makes us be stuck. And there's 8 different types of stuck that scientists have basically identified that our brain does when it's under a lot of stress. We talk about this as mental health issues. Um, they're not all inclusive, but when it comes down to specifically 8 functions of the brain and being stuck, these will be the ones they've identified. Then from there, we'll talk about some strategies on what you can do to basically, get unstuck and have your brain rewire itself, have your brain change how it's feeling. But starting out first, let's talk about just the brain in general, right? The brain in general. And I want you guys to think about it like it's a charge, right? Your brain, just like your cell phone, has a limited amount of charge in it. And because of that, oh, Kevin dropped off. I'm sure he'll be back. And because of that, there he is. Um, and because of that, we need to recharge it. Like, you don't let your battery on your phone die because you always plug it in and recharge it. But we don't do the same thing to our brain. We don't ensure that it's always powered up to the way that it should be. Um, so I want to say hello to everybody, Kev, first.
Yeah, welcome, Sina and Atif. Glad to have you guys with us today.
So what we'll do is we'll kind of go through one at a time the 8, types of brain issues, I guess, that we can have when we get stuck. And I'm not talking about like the major things like where we have just depression and anxiety, specifically getting into these 8. I forget what they're called, but they're biotype is what they're called scientifically. So the first one is rumination. And rumination talks about uncertainty. It's just kind of basically where we feel like we're always uncertain, we're always brooding, we're always over analyzing. And that's one of the first ways that our brain tends to get stuck. Any thoughts on that first one, Kev?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we're seeing lots of people commenting. I see it on various social media platforms about overthinking. We spend way too much time overthinking, and it's not that we don't need to think, it needs to be done in context. And when we overthink, and it's usually in the form of what if, what if, what if, what if. And that is not a healthy place to go. The other side, or the maybe kind of the antidote for that, is to have things that we can anchor to, things we can attach ourselves mentally, emotionally, spiritually to. And that, of course, where I'm going to go with this. And one of those big ones is vision. Is if we've got a clear vision, and especially if we've got mission and values to go along with it, we come back to that. We reattach there and let go of this what if, and ruminating, overthinking too much.
Yep, and I think it's very common that's happening right now. We are overfed. We talk about this all the time. News, we're constantly living in fear, and it's making us overthink every step and really not act. That's the whole point of what we're talking about. People are not acting because they're sitting there overthinking, or paralysis by analysis, right? We've talked about that term before, and that's where we're going to run into that, whether it be personal life or professional life, right? You could be thinking about making a business move, but you're thinking about all the possible things that can go wrong and seeing the bad in everything that's not going to necessarily support you, or even personal life, right? You're thinking about something as simple as going on vacation and being able to recharge, but you're worried that COVID's going to come back and travel is going to get canceled again. What are you going to do then? And then you don't even buy a ticket at all, and you just don't do anything about it, right? So
Well,
that's
and
yep.
another practical tip in my book for that is what we use in the military: 70% solution. you're not going to get a perfect plan. You're not going to get everything nailed down. Just get it to a 70% practical ability to move ahead, and then adjust as you move forward.
Yeah, and it's the life. Life is uncertain. Life doesn't
Mhm.
have very many things that are certain besides like taxes and death. And here, those are the only two that we can count on. And you just have to move. You have to figure out as close as you can to the best plan that you can, and then realize that you may have to adjust, may have to pivot, may have to do something different. Um, the next one is cognitive fog, right? This is where it's a biotype where we're basically experiencing forgetfulness. We have trouble finding words. For me,
Mm,
this happens very often. Like not anymore, but when I was working in my previous job, 4 years ago, I would give so much of myself to that job, so much of myself to that team, and not spend enough time on taking care of myself, not nurturing my body and my mind. And all of a sudden, I'm talking and I'm literally stuttering. And I don't mean like a stutter, but it's almost like tripping over words, right? And really
I
can't
think
find the right one.
your word you're looking for, stammering. We kind of, yeah.
Yep, stammering, perfect. Yeah, that's the one, right? And or like forgetting stuff. You
Mm,
end up going to the store and need to buy, a loaf of bread or something like that. You walk out of the store with five things but no loaf of bread because you just
yeah.
didn't even think about it, right? Stuff like that. And we joke about it and we kid about it, but the reality is it's our brain sending red flags that hey, I am not recharged. I am not functioning the way that I should be.
Welcome, Shona and Rick and Zahid. Glad to have you here. Zahid, if I mispronounce your name, if you'll clarify for me, I'll get it the best I can. Glad to have y'all with us. So, um, yeah, your comment about too much information. For me, I get so many things twirling around in my head that I will uh, get that brain fog. I'll get where there's just too many pieces going around, and when I try to stop on one, it gets hard, and that takes getting back and letting go of things for a time, and and sometimes letting go of them long term or period permanently.
But yeah, cognitive fog is one that I probably have the most experience with personally, or issues with personally. So it's a big red flag for me. As soon as I notice it, I do a lot of things for stress management to once again recharge
Mm,
that brain. If you're just joining, folks, we're just talking about different types of biotypes that our brain experiences where we overload it, we're overly stressed, and it hurts our mental health and it gets us stuck and inability to move forward. We got a
let's see.
comment here. I
Yeah,
think.
Shona's got a comment. It says work life balance is an ongoing learning issue. One day you feel you have it together, next day you can feel like a rug pulled out from under you, without a doubt. And people are pulling rugs more regularly than ever now, and life circumstances are too. Definitely, Shona. Thanks.
And Shauna, this is why me and Kevin don't talk about work-life balance. We talk about work-life congruence, right? It's the coexistence between the two. They're never going to be perfectly balanced, but there needs to be enough of one to counteract the other, and they need to be, kind of merged together as much as possible. Things like scheduling personal time in your work calendar,
Mm,
just the same way as you schedule work trips in your personal calendar, right? Like
hmm.
things like that, making sure that you're taking time to recharge. And it's small things like, right, like taking walks after a business meeting, like a little 5-10 minute walk to clear your head, reset your brain so that it doesn't get to these points that we're talking about being stuck.
Yeah, and one thing to note that I think people that are entrepreneurs, especially solopreneurs, are especially guilty of allowing this to happen and not making time for self care. And and one of the things I'm in halfway through leadership course right now. I'm teaching, and one of the things I keep reminding them: if it's not on your schedule, it's not going to happen. Or if you do to-do list, if it's not on your to-do list every day, it's not going to happen. So make it a point. I mean, be really intentional to schedule those times. those disconnects, whether it be a walk or whatever works well for you.
So the next type of stuck that we get, the next biotype, is being stuck in negative bias. It's basically where we have negative self-talk, we're vocalizing feelings of worthlessness or inadequacy, and constantly seeking reassurance from others versus being self-reliant and really, as people say, being authentically ourselves. We try to please other people. We try to fit a mold that we think other people want from us. And anything that doesn't fit that perception for ourselves, we start beating ourselves up and start talking down to ourselves like we're failures. And the smallest things become big deals when it comes down to our mistakes or failures or things like that.
Yeah, and one of the best ways to avoid that is to have a friend, a mentor, or a coach, depending on the need, to talk through those things. Will really be able to share those. And of course, prayer and meditation are other ways to address that particular issue. Keep it in perspective so that we don't allow those around us to uh, put us into a predetermined form or something that's been set up culturally or socially or
Mhm.
what have you. Is take those times and voice those doubts, those hurts, questions. So, and welcome, Zaid. Glad to have you with us this morning.
So we've covered rumination, we've covered cognitive fog, we've covered negative bias. The next biotype, or kind of the way that our brain gets stuck, is inattention. Can't sustain attention, focus, or plan effectively, and consistently missing appointments or deadlines, things like that. A little bit different than just brain fog, where we're like forgetfulness or trouble finding words. This is where we're just lacking ability to sustain attention. ADHD is on the rise like crazy. It has
Mm,
been for ever since technology has become a big part of our life when it comes down to screen time. And it's not just in kids. Adult ADHD is actually like super on the rise, and people are struggling with it. But not enough people are talking about this as it's just a way of our brain saying that, hey, I am overloaded. I don't have enough charge left to be able to sustain these activities, to keep sustaining this overload of screen time, of information that you're putting on me. And now in a regular task, I struggle with sustaining attention.
well, I joke when I speak with groups about we don't call ours ADHD, we call it OSTD, oh shiny thing disorder. And it's because, we let our mind just get so overloaded, it doesn't know how to rest anymore. And that's a condition, a situation I deal with. I'm confident that had I been a student in current school environment, probably would have been labeled so many different ways, including ADHD. And but there are ways to address it effectively and avoid it, avoid the cons or symptoms of it with a bit of intentionality and some understanding of what's at the root of it. Welcome, Suzanne. Glad to have you with us today.
And I have ADHD myself, and I've been on medication, off medications, on and off. And every time I get on medications, I talk to my doctor. I usually go to like DOs instead of MDs. And I'm like, hey, I want this to be temporary. I want this to be a short-term solution for and I need to fix the long-term problem myself. And I was like, I want you to hold me to it. Don't let me, want this for too many years, or actually try to do it like in a year tops, and really work on stress management, really work on nurturing my brain, but not allowing myself to constantly go up in doses, because that's what ends up happening. You get on these meds and you taking them and it works and everything's good, and then your body gets adjusted because you never really solve the root cause. You just keep giving medication. So then the dosage has to go up, go up, go up. Before you know it, you're like got heart palpitations, you got blood pressure issues, because of this medication that's constantly stimulating your brain instead of being able to recharge it properly.
Well, and what's interesting, and I can give some examples of how I understand this, but most people don't realize that meds for those people that have ADD, ADHD rather than being suppressants or things to calm most people, they're actually stimulants. And even though it helps those of us with that challenge to calm our mind, it still stimulates the rest of our body. And those are where we get the outcomes that Anton's talking about, the blood pressure, heart racing, things like that, because we're actually taking a form of stimulant to help to try to slow our minds down. So it's not without challenges and consequences. And I still find that when I can get away and make myself stop and physically have to change my setting, that when I can do that and give my mind a chance to kind of spin down, I mean, it's not instant. It takes time for my mind to just spin down, slow down, and because it takes a time to process what's already out there, and then once the stimulus stops, then it will slow down, and I can begin to uh, get it my mind at a better speed. And one way, in fact, that this change of position or situation for me when it comes to listening, I actually have some physical stances, positions that I get into when I'm really trying to listen to people. And it will work if you are aware of it first and then know how to take some steps to really slow your brain down.
And I think that's the key right there. You said aware of it. And that's why we're talking about these, brain uh, biotypes. And so you understand that this type of stuff is not just something that is like you're broken or you're different from other people. If you're struggling with this stuff, so is the rest of the world.
Mm.
There's so many people that are struggling with this in different ways. You may have one or two of these, you may have five of them, right? So just reminding, we've gone over rumination, which is uncertainty. We've gone over cognitive fog, which is forgetfulness. We've gone over negative bias, which is like negative self-talk. We talked about inattention, can't sustain attention. And now we have fifth one is context insensitivity, which is basically when it seems physically, emotionally, and mentally the person is checked out. They're
Mm.
isolated, possibly compulsive or obsessive behaviors, right? This is where a lot of times people end up, drinking a lot. They end up, abusing food and sugars, things like that, because they're just trying to not be numb anymore. And it's very similar to the other one, which I'll mention both of them, and that's emotional numbness, right?
Mm.
Where you're visibly numb, reactions to large and small environments, stress triggers, devoid of joy or any emotion. So those are pretty severe, and that's what we oftentimes classify as depression. But it's just a form of a brain being overloaded, a different type of overload that gets it to be this way.
It's desensitizing. I mean, we get to a point we become to in order to survive, we become desensitized, and I'm convinced that this is part of the reason that we have so many people, rather than a logical or rational response, we've got people constantly having knee jerk reaction and having emotional responses in places where we should be seeing logical responses. And I'm not much on current uh, TV and things, but I did become aware of the situation with the what is it, the Grammy Award? No, not Grammy. That's music.
Oscars.
Oscars, and the fact that we saw someone overreact, and as makes you wonder what's at the root of that. If there are things going on that caused a normally rational individual to overreact or and respond in a way that's just inappropriate. Let's see. Zaid has a comment. Says, I found this to be an issue when it comes to colleagues that pushes you to do more and more. Management starts to compare you and them. If you don't want to do more, then you're not the good one, unfortunately. So, yeah, there quite often is more to doing more than just being excellent in what you do. There's a point where it's going to trying to survive mentally, emotionally in environments that are unhealthy.
And the basic economics come into mind when I hear those kind of comments, and it's very common, unfortunately, that these people need to understand law of diminishing returns.
Mm,
Is when you ask more and more from people, with every unit, you're going to get less and less out of it once you go past a certain threshold, until actually within, it's kind of like working hours, right? They did some research and they said that a person, it can only be effective up to 55 hours. After that, we're actually less effective than we were at 40 hours. And this is a perfect example of that, where poor managers just look at inputs. They're assessing people by their inputs. Okay, this person has done X amount of work, X amount of time, X amount of units of work, instead of looking at what the outcomes are, right? Not how many hours you put in, but what was that final product. And
mm.
some people can do in 20 hours what somebody can't do in 60 hours, because they know how to manage themselves, and talent sometimes, sure. But the point is that these people that keep wanting more and more and more are actually going to be getting less and less and less. But often the change is so gradual that we don't actually understand why it's happening, or we don't even notice it. The leaders don't even notice how their teams are underperforming, because they've just taxed them so heavily.
Yeah, and it's interesting because there's a body of evidence where the magic 40-hour work week is being tested and challenged. That there are people that you will do better having a 32-hour work week and be as productive, if not more productive, than 40 hours. And one of the things about that is that there's not one magic formula. The 40-hour work week is an interesting concept. I need to go back and look and do a little history on it and see where that originated and what was the theoretical basis for it. But it's certainly not the best way or not good to stick with one theoretical formula for everybody and consider that that's the only way to get the right amount of productivity out of that person. And by the way, just a reminder, part of what we're doing is we're talking about mental fog, lack of good processing and things, but we're digging down to roots of things, and that's what Anton and I love to do, is to get down and find the roots of these issues rather than putting on a band-aid on a symptom. Let's see. Suzanne has a comment. Says, I guess there are different kinds of getting stuck. If your routine gets stuck just for a short period of time, if it is manageable by yourself, as you know, the reason for being down, etc. The other side is this long journey of maybe getting serious sick and worse, and every medication seems to be a rope to pull me out of the water or out of downtime. Where is it? Uh, Whereas it's the possible when life gets lonely, as your physical abilities less, you pretty much we're pretty much at the end. Never had actually issue, and let's see here. It, all right, I know. Let's see. It cut off. Let me look at it on my phone. It's funny. Bear with me. Uh, Never had actually issues with huge projects and overtime. My trigger is to be needed. As long as I get challenged, the better it is. So yes, the bottom line is that getting stuck is not all the same for everybody involved. It varies by person, and that's why we're looking at a variety of root causes, because they vary by person.
No, and I can relate with, as she's saying, when she feels needed, being challenged, then kind of the better we are. And there is a point, right? The point is that there is a point at which you're going to get diminishing returns. And that's where I was talking about before, my previous job, when I would get brain fog and, start stammering on words. It's because I gave too much. I felt needed. I felt like I was making a difference and an impact. So I gave and gave and gave and gave, and my body just couldn't keep giving. And I would become irritable at home. I would become, so many of these other things that we're talking about. And even though I felt energized in the moment, I felt like I could do 12 hours, 5, 6 days a week, no problem. It ended up catching up with me in the long term, but the change was so small that I didn't recognize until it was well down the road.
And
Great
and
point.
wouldn't you say,
Ancient.
Anton, that it's fair to say if you find yourself behaving in ways or responding or reacting in ways that you go, wow, where did that come from? That's a real big indicator. There's a root there that needs to be figured out and addressed.
Yeah, absolutely. So we got last two of these biotypes, and
Let's let me see. We got a couple of comments. Unfortunately, their indifference with all of this. They only look on how many units of work one did. Anything else is just what you should do, and that's part of the challenge of balancing between management and leadership. Management sets goals and KPIs, things like that. Leadership helps us go, but does that fit each person? Is it appropriate for them individually? So, yes, indifference is a bad sign in terms of management.
And an interesting part is like we don't often talk about this, but managers get burnt out too. And sometimes some of them acting indifferent and some of them acting hostile is just them being overloaded and they're not aware of how they're behaving with other people. Unfortunately, leaders are humans too.
Yeah.
They struggle, they're not machines, they're not perfect. And I'm not necessarily, I don't know the situation and justifying by any means, but sometimes looking at their situation and the best way to help them is actually to help them help themselves. And when they are able to help themselves, they become better for their teams.
Well, and that's where contextualizing. I know one of the biotypes you mentioned was a symptom is losing context. Because when we can contextualize, it helps us approach it and maybe approach them to help as well. Rick has a comment. He says, I've learned not to overthink. Hopefully, my new walk with faith will help me not to do this. Rick, it certainly does. As you grow in your faith, it does help to not spend so much time overthinking. Part of that is because when we have faith, there are times we can say, I don't understand it, but I know that God is protecting me, looking out for me, and I can let go of it and trust that with Him. So, yeah, certain value in that faith and dealing with these issues, because some of these issues are based in I can't find answers, and we're not always going to find answers.
And Rick, congrats, by the way. Kevin shared the news with me. That's awesome to hear. And I'm so happy for you, man. The last two are threat response, and that's a very severe one. That's where you may get things like panic attacks, inability to
Mhm.
breathe, really distressed, anxious, elevated heart rate, feeling flushed, very, very strong physiological responses. This is usually when we've really pushed our limits and we've gotten to a place where body's almost ready to shut down,
Mm.
where it's stuck, not just mentally, it's stuck physically just as much as it is mentally. And the last one is anxious avoidance. And this is one that is very interesting to me, because this is where we're feeling flooded, overwhelmed, severe aversion to something, or isolation, inability to kind of get the task done or start the task. And we call that procrastination. And all of a sudden, everybody's a procrastinator. Everybody's starting to procrastinate. Why? Well, it's not that they're procrastinators, it's that their brain is experiencing this type of biotype issue. It's that their brain has been overloaded and they're not necessarily recharging. So all these symptoms are coming into life, and that's what's happening. If you're seeing yourself do that, recharge your brain.
Mm. And one of the things to consider is there are different ways to deal with these issues, these challenges, starting on a brief, immediate basis versus long term. And one of the ones that to me, it comes to mind that is truly powerful that we don't often take advantage of is controlled breathing. We it is a powerful tool. There is evidence that it will help us even to a point that people with high blood pressure, if they regularly do controlled breathing, it can help bring down and manage high blood pressure. And just so you'll know, there's even apps for your phone. If you need something to kind of focus on and help walk you through it, there's even apps that help you with deep breathing to manage this. Anton, can you think of other practical tips, whether they're for in immediate situations or whatever?
So what you're getting into is there's two ways that you really are going to help yourself. There's many subsets, but two primary ways. One's a short term, right? Something you can do in the moment, as Kevin said, like breathing, and some are long term, and that's going to be things like meditation practice, good nutrition,
Mm,
exercise. What you're talking about is one when people are feeling like, for example, when they have that threat response, they're starting to feel panicky. It's literally trying to activate our senses. It's being present in the moment, finding something that's a specific color, identifying a few of those things in the room, maybe feeling a texture of something physically. Where we're trying to just basically become as present as we can in the moment. Breathing is a good one. Focus on exhales the most. Research has
mm,
shown that the exhalation is the most beneficial part of the breathing practice that really activates our parasympathetic nervous system. Because ultimately, what stress does is when our brain's experiencing one of these things, we're stuck. Our body's stuck in being sympathetic
mm,
until we help it to become parasympathetic, which is more calm and relaxed and present versus, running around in the past, the future, or whatever has happened or whatever may still come. Um, Other things you can do, obviously, is underrated massages. Like you're
mm,
feeling stressed, go get a massage. And I know that's not possible sometimes. And people are like, well, how am I going to get a massage? This is such a typical thing that I hear all the time, right? How am I going to get a massage for an hour if I don't have any time in the day as it is? I'm like, you don't have any time in a day because you are ineffective. You're maybe putting a lot of time in, and then you're going to say I'm efficient, but one of the things you'll hear me and Kevin talk a lot about is being effectively inefficient. Right?
mm-hmm.
You're very good at being, or sorry, inefficiently, or no, inefficiently. Hold on, I got this backwards. Effectively inefficient. No, I had it right the first time. But that's where you're putting all this time in, but you're not getting the outcomes that you want. So instead of taking an extra hour away from that and getting a massage, whatever it is, like there's flotation take therapy, so you can do
Mm,
cryotherapy. There's just so many different things. Red light therapy. I mean, I can go on and on about this stuff. Depends on what fits kind of your style. You're gonna get that time back. That's the point that I'm making, because all those little ineffectiveness that happen throughout the day, you're going to be able to get rid of them. And yes, you may be having less input of time for the day, but the output is going to be greater because your brain is actually going to be recharged. That's just the truth, folks. There's no argument to it. I've seen it happen many times with many clients. It's just hard to prove it to people at first. So if you're an emotional person, see how you feel throughout the day. Write down and journal how you are now versus try to get some resets in throughout the day. It could be a walk in the park, just doing that after long meetings. Breathing exercise, like I said, kind of said, but the point is note how you're feeling better, or actually track your performance. See how many,
mm.
boxes you check in a day that are done and actually quality done, and see how you're going to have more of those with less inputs of time if you're taking care of your brain.
And for some people, one of the best ways to track some of this is just journaling, or if you keep a calendar note on the calendar, hey, good day, uh, effective today, or something, and look at patterns, because it takes awareness. and especially if we're in the midst of dealing with some of these biotype brain issues, we're not going to remember clearly. So we need to utilize the journaling or writing down notes. Anton Zaid's got a suggestion for it, something we might want to think about. Says we need to take our shows and convert them into a book. Who knows? That might be a good option there.
Yeah, I tried writing a book. I'm not a good writer. We'd have to get a ghostwriter. A lot of
um,
this stuff I talk about, folks, is on. You can find my book on Amazon. It's called "Death by a Thousand Paper Cuts," and it's a similar idea. Is that there's a lot of tiny little things that we do throughout the day that, on its own, are not a big deal, like a paper cut. But if you put 1,000 paper cuts into a body, and don't let them heal each time, that's going to cause a serious problem, and sometimes, unfortunately, potentially death. And it's a heavy title, but that's because I learned from my dad's death. I learned how he, basically worked himself to death. He constantly gave more, gave more, gave more until he had no more to give. And he ended up having stomach cancer and then ultimately died from lymphoma. But no, I appreciate that, Z. I think if I can find a ghostwriter, this would be a good idea.
don't let him kid you. I've read the book, and he does a good job writing. He writes from his heart, and that makes a big difference. So let's see. Suzanne has a comment. Says totally agree. Middle management is often the most uncontrolled group with burnout symptoms because they want to get higher in position. Good leaders are hard to find. They should look out for their people and shed light on them. I used to say to my teams, people, it's okay to freak. It's okay to be down. It doesn't make you a bad person. Me as a leader, ex-leader, I used to let people know, hey, it's not one of my best days. It's totally okay. That openness makes a good team. And to be honest, Suzanne, you're so right, because I have companies approaching me now going, I am worried about my frontline leaders because they are working so hard. The good news is they're very committed and loyal. The problem is to a fault, and to a point where they are concerned about them burning out physically, mentally, and emotionally. And it is a real issue that is not always being addressed effectively, because the frontline middle management people are the ones that are managed most and led least, if you will.
And it's a
Um,
dangerous one because some of them making decent money, and people feel like, oh, because they're getting paid for it, it's fine. Like we don't need to worry about them. They're getting their reward and monetary compensation, and such a wrong way of thinking about it. But reading your comments, Suzanne, it reminds me. We're talking about overcoming and being unstuck, and one of the best ways to be unstuck is to prevent being stuck in the first place, and that's building resilience. Building resilience physically and mentally is very, very important in modern day, probably more than ever before, because we are so highly stressed. And what I hear you talk about is having a growth mindset. It's okay to say I'm currently not okay. I'm having a bad day.
mm,
But I know that I'm not stuck there. I'm not fixed in this environment. I can change things. I can do things, and tomorrow be better, next week be better. And at the root of that is having growth mindset. I think Carol Dweck wrote about that in her book Mindset.
hmm
It's a good one to read, but that's one of the best things you can do for your resilience. People that have a fixed mindset, research shows that they're significantly less resilient than people with growth mindset, because people with fixed mindset, they feel like their situation is always outside of their control. And that is something that's incredibly stressful for our mind and for our bodies, feeling like we lack control. When we think that we have the ability to change the situation is much better perceived for us and our brain than the situation that we feel like we have no control over. So that is a huge point.
Yeah. And one of the keys there is we need to understand how little we actually control. But the one thing that can be most effective in any situation is controlling our own attitude, our own mindset. And we can control that fully, especially when we aren't dealing with these biotypes, and we're managing those effectively.
I want to
Um,
jump to Suzanne's last comment. She said, I also found taking care of others, helping out, writing a letter to someone who needs words of calmness. And it's an interesting one because sometimes when we can't get our life under control, or sometimes we feel like certain situations are not manageable. I'm not saying that's necessarily the situation with you, Suzanne, but as an example, sometimes the most control thing we can do is helping others, is seeing that we're changing other people's situations, we're improving their situations, and it makes our situation seem more manageable. It makes us believe that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and we will also get out of this. It's a very common thing that we see, and that's example is comedians, right? When they make other people laugh, they feel better, even though they're mostly struggling themselves. It's a very common thing with comedians, but they're depressed and having issues. So their outlet is by helping other people feel better.
well, and it's a principle. We're going to reap what we sow, and so if we're sowing uh, good, positive, uh, good narratives into other people, we're going to reap those. And especially when it comes to narratives, our ears hear what we tell others as well as what we tell ourselves. It's not discriminatory between the two. When we hear it, our brain processes it, whether it's directed at ourselves or directed at someone else. So, yeah, reaching out, helping others is a huge way to address it. A couple of tips here. Shona shared some breathing technique tips. It's a That's helpful if you're not sure when we're talking about purposeful breathing. That's a tip of how to approach it. And then Zaid talks about, I did not know this one, that you can get a browser extension that will help with apparently with some rain sounds or things. I have to share that in my own situation, one of my stressful settings is when I'm behind the wheel in a car. And especially when you consider that I drive around in Atlanta traffic. And what I have chosen to do is to select music inside my car that is calming uh, on purpose. I would normally like to have some music to kind of rock to or jam to or whatever. But I find that if I am in those settings, to have some calming music, much more effective to keep me from going places that I don't need to go. Um,
And I just want to point out to folks, a lot of times when people talk about being unstuck, they're talking about what actions I need to take, right? The business plans I need to write, my daily journal, my daily schedule I need to keep, the way that I schedule my schedules, and those may be great. But I just want to point out today we're not talking about what you need to do externally. We're talking about getting unstuck internally because a lot of these issues, a lot of these actions that people are taking to overcome some bad situations, bad symptoms, are stemming from these root causes of the brain being stuck. Get your brain unstuck, and you're going to see all these other things are just going to flow much easier. I'm not saying the other way is wrong, but it's leaving out a very important component, not just changing what we do, it has to change how we are. By changing how we are, we change what we do, not the other way around.
And that's why getting to the root. See, part of what we're talking about is not it readily seen as symptoms always. It's masked by other symptoms. And so look beyond changing a habit, look beyond physical responses to address the question of our internal, our mind, our will, our emotions, and part of this has is related to our spiritual well-being. Okay, if we're not addressing those things, the effect on our mind, our brain, is very remarkable. Let's see. Wow, good comments. Welcome, Lee. Glad to have you on board. And let's see here. Um, I was looking over the other comments. Suzanne comments, good way to de-stress or going on long walks and make a good point of looking around you. Really, that one is so true. And especially, and for people that live in the city, they can't appreciate this. And some would say this is not for them, but this is one of those that I think is pretty close to universal, and that's getting out somewhere away into creation, nature, and walk around in the woods, even on a beach, where you're isolated from a lot of stimulus other than just what is naturally around us, is such powerful effect, really. So, yeah, taking the time to get out in situation, take a walk, and there's even, Anton, you might or might not know about this. I've read recently that getting out in nature and walking barefoot theoretically has some potentially physical positive effect. I don't know. I think sometimes it's good to get your feet dirty or your hands dirty as well.
You took the words out of my mouth. That's what I was gonna do as a plus one. Try to get barefoot when you're doing that. Um, there is you can't deny physics. Physics are real, energy is real, and there's just basically talk about being grounded into Earth, between your body and Earth, and that. There's so much to that. The other aspect of it, even if you don't believe in energy, compare how much more aware you are when you're barefoot
Mm.
comparing to when you're a comfy shoe. Very simple, very plain way of looking at it. Your mind is going to be much more present and much more aware on that moment when you're planting your foot barefoot than when you're in a comfy shoe. I mean, even just like stepping through certain things, not trying to get your feet to hurt, like that's just going to make you be hyper aware of the present moment versus something else. And I like Suzanne's comment on truly being grounded and truly watching nature and being present and not being on our phone, because I see this all the time. People are like, well, I go for walks, I exercise. I'm like, well, what are you doing during that time? Right? Are you scanning the news? Are you on TikTok? Are you on some videos? Whatever, listening to music that's not necessarily like calming music. And you may be getting a partial benefit, but not really the majority of it, unless you find a way to ground yourself in that moment.
And I know this almost might sound silly to some, but when I am trying to truly relax and unplug, one of my favorite pairs of shoes are moccasins, leather moccasins. They don't have a sole; it's just a piece of leather formed into a shoe around my foot. And the value of that is that you're aware of what you're stepping on and how you're balancing and so on, so much more so that it forces us to just have that awareness, and that for me is very helpful. I know there may be some physiologic value in there, I'm not sure, but at the end of the day, I know if I want to have my most comfortable shoes for being around, and all those moccasins are the ones. Let's see. Lee has I think it's a comment slash question. Says, "Am I feeling stuck? Do I have any choice other than move forward?" I think a lot of people are feeling stuck, and the problem is that to make it worse, they have a sense of not even being able to move forward, and that's a real problem with what we see around us. That's when you take that to your ultimate extreme, it's when you become hopeless and even goes so far to consider suicide and things like that. And that's a very dangerous place. And it all comes back to this internal issues that we don't address, we're not aware of, and don't consider it. We are, again, treating symptoms.
Well, the issues with these biotypes in our brain being overloaded is that it shuts down our logic center, right? It really disconnects our ability to move forward and look at things in a very logical way. And we become very reflexive, right? Very reactive. And it's because we're in that more primitive brain of ours that's focused on survival, right? And some of these things that make sense to a normal state brain don't come to play in that kind of state brain. They don't seem like logical solutions. They seem impossible. And the only thing that we can do is focus on survival, focus on getting out of that moment, focus on getting through the moment, but never really being in the moment.
I just thought of something, Anton. You'll have to kind of see if my brain is processing a good thought here, or if I'm just maybe need to back up and do some brain work. But we're talking about barefoot. One of the challenges as we age with our brain has to do with our conscious processing. Well, they tell us and this is something I'm keenly aware of at this stage in my life, is having to consider keeping my brain functioning well, processing, not just acting based on everything prior. And walking barefoot forces the issue, because if you start to step down and you find a rock under your foot, you're going to all of a sudden be processing and having to think, and you're not functioning on an unconscious level. You're moving to a conscious level, and that's good for good health for your brain, and so on. And if you're not careful, it gives you good exercise, because you're going to be hopping around on one foot trying to figure out what stuck your foot.
No, you're spot on, Kev. It's our feet have so many nerve endings. It's
mm,
insane how many nerve endings are in our feet. And a lot of times when we walk in shoes, this whole concept of barefoot running and these minimalist shoes is that we're not using our feet as intended. They're meant to give
mm,
us a lot of biofeedback back to the brain, but by using these comfortable shoes and support artificial created by the shoes, we really are not using our brain the way it needs to be used, and we're not giving it the signals and the feedback that it needs.
mm.
So you're spot on.
Okay. Well, I had a good thought. Maybe my brain is still working pretty good then. But I do need to go barefoot more often, I think.
I see Zaid said maybe just put these points into a list of notes that is distributed to those that attend. I'm just saying this because I see and feel the value of what we're talking about. Music to my ears, Zaid. Honestly, my dream, and just need time for it. Stop making excuses probably and just dedicate time for it. But I'd like to just take these shows and turn them into an article, right? A short summary, something that's in written form people can get access to, but also ultimately, advertise the show and hopefully more people get experience to it. Because folks, honestly, the biggest thing for us, why we're doing this, is that Human SOS is a movement that we're trying to create. Hashtag Human SOS that you always see on the screen, always see in our post, the Human SOS show. We see that the world is headed for a very dangerous place when it comes down to human beings and sustainability of human beings. Not sustainability of the planet. That's important, folks. I'm not denying that whatsoever. But we are talking about the planet all the time, and we're not focusing on our own bodies, our own minds, our own feelings, emotions, just all of it. And the way we're operating is we're running on fumes, but we
Mm,
don't realize it because we've gradually changed. So we've forgotten what good feels like. And the reason me and Kev have these shows is that we want to remind people of what good should be and give you some tips and advice on how to get there and to get some advice and tips from the audience like you often provide.
and I will open up the door. I haven't checked with Anton, but I think he'll be good with this. If you want to support the Human SOS movement, maybe one way would be to volunteer to transcribe some of the episodes if you want to, and then get it transcribed. Then we could then share it out through the website and through the Perspective Force company page on LinkedIn or so on. So if you want to get involved, we certainly welcome that, because ultimately our goal is to start something that will not be dependent on us and that will outlive us, hopefully, to help many generations to come, uh, to address the issue of being healthy and managing our stress. Certainly, I had to throw this one up for on Lee. He was saying his favorite shoes are cowboy boots. Key is we each have our own. Consider that. Um, okay, let's see here. Maybe walk barefoot and arm disconnect from your bare arm, I think is his comment. Yeah, smartwatches are, I appreciate the value. Mine, I've recently in the last couple of years gotten one, and I chuckle because one of the features on it, if I sit very long, starts vibrating on my arm and say, hey, you need to move. And that's helpful. But like Zaid says, let's get the outside inputs minimized and go out and connect with creation, which we're a part of. And when we do that, it also gives us a lot better perspective of ourselves relative to the rest of creation as well. Um, let's see. Suzanne's got an HR comment. It says, as HR always invited people to talk and being trusted, I unknotted many people, but this was in a way better HR situation than corporate moments. Uh, I got a lot of people out of this moment. Thankfully, just myself, I am a bit very much stuck now beyond all helping tools that I am so educated of. I think when needed, go to a therapist. It helps you through. And you're right. One of the reasons that we offer coaching, and we still offer that, is we know and that there are times where you need that someone from the outside. If you've got a trusted mentor, that's okay. Some situations you need professional medical, psychological medical help. But quite often, a good coach, and I stress good because not uh, all coaches are created equal, is a coach can help you get unstuck because they know how to dig down to find the roots rather than adjusting the symptoms. And that's something that Anton and I work very hard on and work with each other over the years to know how to identify those roots. And when we can start doing that, help people see those roots, it makes a huge difference. So, um,
I've used
definitely,
therapists myself. I mean, that's I'm a coach and I've used coaches, but there's times that I use therapists, and I will add that all great therapists are also coaches. They're
yeah.
not just there to tell you what to do; they're there to ask a question and have you reason through some of the stuff and talk yourself through some of the issues. They're just there, question, question, question. Okay, let's put an emphasis on this, and then next question.
Yeah, that and Anton and I even do that for each other at times. We'll come to each other and say, well, I just can't get beyond this. Let's talk about it. And we talk about it. And many times we're able to coach each other and it works very well. But don't be afraid if you're feeling stuck, especially if you're showing some of the more extreme symptoms, reach out, please. Reach out to us, reach out to somebody before you get to a point of feeling hopeless or stuck permanently, because that's when you can deal with some real issues, not just mentally and emotionally, but even at that point, your body is likely in a bad spot too. And they feed on each other. And that's something we forget too. So definitely, that's a good piece of advice. So, Anton, you want to last thoughts before we wind it up?
Well, Zaid said it well. Answer to your point, if humans are not sustained, what's the point of sustaining a planet?
Mm,
And
good
we're so worried
perspective.
about our future generations and what are we leaving them behind, but we're not talking about enough how we're leaving them behind, right?
Mm,
The state that we're in, the existence that we've created is going to be passed on to future generations, and we need to remind ourselves that it is just as important as the air they breathe, the thoughts that they have, the ways that they behave, how they are is just as important as the air they breathe and the trees around them. Just thank you, folks, as always. Thank you all for joining. Thank you so much for your comments, for your engagement. I constantly will say this every single show. We wouldn't be here without you.
mm.
Please help us share, spread the news about Human SOS, get people to join the show, get people to follow the hashtag. Feel free to use the hashtag freely when you guys are writing it. If me and Kevin are online, we'll see it. We'll comment whenever we can. But it's going to take a village to turn this thing around. We are heading in the right direction very slowly. We need to speed up how fast we start heading in the right direction.
Just to keep ahead, to keep up with or try to get ahead of the spiral downward, we got to spiral upward more. And by the way, free tool. Okay. Uh, a way to get unstuck is we've got an assessment that's related to stress and how you're managing it. It's on our website for www.perspectiveforce.com. Take our stress assessment. It doesn't cost anything. And I will promise you, if you respond to the statements honestly, it will help you identify some real root areas in your life that may be causing you to be stuck. And then we'll be happy to uh, follow up with you if you like. By the way, your email is only going to Anton and I, and we only sell it to certain groups. No, I'm just kidding. We don't sell your emails. And but we do want to reach out and help if needed. And it's available for groups, corporate groups, whatever. And so please use it. We worked hard on it, and we want you to have it. And it may be the very tool that helps you identify some roots to get unstuck. So thanks, everyone. I appreciate you. You guys make the show. We're just here facilitating, right, Anton?
That's it.
And so we'll be back next Tuesday. God bless for amazing rest of your week, and figure out if you're stuck and see if we can help you or someone can help you get unstuck and so you can get healthier. Thanks, everyone. Take care. Bye.